you've been missing my sometimes obscure musings, you're in luck. But after that music, maybe I have nothing to say. Since I'm no longer the leader of the society, I don't have the restraints of that particular job. Restraints that come with keeping everyone happy and keeping the organization on an even keel. But I am still a leader in the ethical humanist movement, and I like being a provocateur, or imagining myself as one. I now feel I can allow my heretical tendencies free rein, and although, to be honest, I think some of you have heard most of this stuff already, and maybe it's not that heretical. But I am, and have been for some time, one of my projects is trying to pull the ideas of this movement together into a more clear, focused package, and this is part of it. For the newer folks here, I should let you know that I have an exalted perception of what ethical humanism ought to be, and you're about to hear it. I think that there is a unique genius in the ethical humanist philosophy, but we have been too casual in our attitudes towards the importance of that philosophy of life. So please appreciate I'm actually trying to articulate the ideas of this movement that are often perplexing because they are so different than the ordinary. I'm going to be talking about ethical humanist religion, which may have the trappings of the usual religions, but on hearing the ideas, it sounds very different. Ethical societies are part of a movement that is open. We try hard to appreciate that every human being is on their own journey. But not everyone will find the ideas of ethical humanism compatible, because we don't shove the ideas down your throat, but there is a belief system at the center of the ethical culture, ethical humanist movement. We are who we are. In ethical humanism, we try to be nice and respectful of the traditional organized religions. Those institutions, as distinct from the spirit or the feel of any particular congregation, those institutions are about upholding the position of their grand, old, mysterious religions. But to be honest, those religions haven't made much sense in at least 200 years. And people in, say, a Reformed synagogue don't dwell on the Red Sea separating or on being the chosen people. And the average Catholic doesn't think about virgin births and ignores the Church's stand on abortion. In other words, people have moved on from that mystical, otherworldly position. And yet, the institutional religions continue to talk about all of those, what I would consider strange ideas. And those ideas continue to be the default position to which people return if challenged. So rather than continue being diplomatic and nice about it, I think it's time to admit that organized religion, as distinct from us, which is disorganized religion, organized religion has reached its limit in making human beings better people. The stories don't work. And since making people good people is supposedly one of the primary excuses for the existence of any particular religion, it seems to me it's time to unpack more energetically our radically different approach to religion and offer our ethical religion more definitely as a replacement for the failed religions that continue to play a part in screwing us up and screwing up the world. In other words, the world needs us. And to start, as far as I'm concerned, it's time to move on from dependence on the deed before creed adage that you hear quite often as a description of ethical humanism. On hearing it, people too often assume that we are neutral territory, that if they are good persons and vote Democrat, we will not challenge them with the subtlety of our perspective on life. Yes, it is true, we stress action over supposed theories. But theory, as Collier, the earlier quote at the beginning, who was our former leader back in the 40s and the 50s, as he said, theory affects action. The way you think influences the way you act. Learning that germs cause disease gets you washing your hands. So it's time to boldly say creed makes a difference, and our ethical humanist creed makes more sense than those ancient transcendent religions, and it's more efficient at making people and our world better. The better way, it seems to me, of saying deed before creed is deed is our creed. How you act, your deeds, demonstrates who you are. Our creed about bringing out the best in life ought to be how we show who we are. So, I'll be offering my version of the whole package of this religion. And by whole package, I mean that it has something for both people building their own meaningful inner life, but also for trying to make a better world. And as some of you may remember, I have a sense of emergency. I've listened to Howard Peer too much. So besides this as a presentation of ethical humanist philosophy, this is also my opinion that the ethical humanist approach to life is a way of saving, at least having some role in saving our messed up world. I believe humankind is possibly in terminal trouble, that the human experiment has reached a limit. We may have gone too far in shaping human beings into takers and not lovers of life. And there is a limit, and there is limited room to turn this around. And for want of a better explanation for this monumental crisis, I offer religion as the problem. You know what? Religion? Global warming has the oceans rising, and we have depleted the resources of the earth, including human resources. Population growth is out of control. Genocide, poverty, and economic exploitation continues unabated. And I'm claiming the problem is religion. Yes. And here's why. It's a long story, and there's parts to it. So part one. I'm fond of reminding people that religion is nothing special. There are so many things that are sacred in this world. Children, great art, the music of the Beatles. Your mind may be the most sacred, but not religion. That is just a human invention, a tool that is supposed to serve us human beings. And how is it supposed to serve us? Well, human beings have the tendency, and have always had the tendency, to want to be somebody. And religion serves that purpose. We are self-conscious beings and are conscious of ourselves among other self-conscious beings, and we want our lives to mean something. We want to feel our lives fit into something bigger, that we are connected to the whole, even beyond the Big Bang. And that is where religion comes in. Religion is the culturally created category, the cubbyhole where human beings organizationally put the stories, put the big picture that becomes the theoretical foundation of a culture, of a society. It offers people a place in the really big process. Even though most people take it for granted and others reject it outright, basic understanding that the religious culture offers becomes the unexamined mindset of the whole culture, even of the rejectors. If I can speak for at least some of the rejectors, we may reject the God idea as a foundation, but we still look for some preordained foundation, some kind of first cause. A couple examples. Look at Russia. Thousands of years of the mystery of the Orthodox God. God in his place with the Tsar as his personal representative. And after 75 years of state-sponsored atheism, the people returned to the need for a Tsar in Putin. The Hindu concept of reality is part of the substratum of Indian society. And part of that concept of reality is the caste system. People are ordained to be in their place. Individually, many people may not care what caste another person is, and the government has made caste illegal. But that sense of an ordained order or status, with some people being higher and some people being lower than you, that's part of the brains of the people in India. The Catholic Church is having a hard time silencing the religious women, the nuns on the bus, who are breaking with the authority of the Church's story. Indeed, those nuns are doing great work. They have moved on to another version of the Christian story, actually a rather humanistic version of the story, but they haven't gone all the way. They work to relieve the suffering caused by the system, but they don't attack the bottom line cause of the pain. Personally, I suspect those nuns are actually writing their own story, taking back from the God of the Vatican the human freedom to decide right and wrong. Okay, now this is still part of part one, but it's another way of looking at the same thing. We human beings who come out of the womb prepared by nature to love life are placed in an environment in which fitting in is all important. Every culture has its box into which it tries to squeeze us. It would be very nice if the box was more porous so that it wouldn't be so hard for some of us to get out. But the foundation of that environment, the cultural environment, that is so deep that it's often unnoticed, is an understanding of life with stories and myths. In other words, a cubbyhole of religion. Actually, for us Americans, the civil religion, the general American religion that as they arrived on our shores, all the old religions had to try to fit themselves into. Those old Western religions had to come to terms with democracy, individualism, and consumerism. Part of my point is going to be that even humanists too often don't find a way out of that cubbyhole of standard American religion. Too often, rather than breaking the standard mold, we continue with a secular form of the cubbyhole mindset, as if there was a plan, some mind, some natural law, some truth that could offer security and confidence as we tell other people why they are wrong. Getting past and over that mindset is, I believe, the genius of ethical humanism. In ethical humanism, you are welcomed into a world of doubt, in which you must, with the company of those around you, build your own foundation. What we do have as a glorious, mysterious replacement for a God-centered or otherworldly foundation is the whole of human history and the creative energy of all of those past and present people who are always trying to make something good. Our foundation is the process, and each and every person can have the realization that they are part of the natural process that is creating this human world. There is no plan except what the creative energy in people are able to accomplish. We are a continuation of the evolutionary process, and in that role, we become moral agents as the only ones in the universe, as far as we know, who can consciously choose what is good or bad for the future of life. The especially negative aspect of standard religious theory is it takes for the human being the freedom to decide what is right and wrong. It makes us actors in some God's production. Well, at least in our philosophy, if not in practice, we reject that escape from freedom. So on to part two. I'm making a case for the idea that human beings need religion. In fact, humankind is suffering from a lack of mature, this world, positive religion, or whatever you want to call it. Religion is that part of human culture that says your life could and should have meaning. It is better if you give it meaning. It is human nature that gets us thinking about our lives meaning something. And religion, with a small r, meaning any music, any literature, any group, any philosophy, any activity that stirs our hearts and minds to do something meaningful, that, with a small r, is religion. And a religion, institutional religion, with a capital R, what does it do? Offers a static, one-size-fits-all story about meaning that is in the clouds and tangential to actual personal living. Call it what you want. But as a tool for making life better, an open conception of what life is all about, that's useful. Religion can be useful if it is done right. Assuming it makes sense to offer a relatively secure place in which to build our hope and our desires and our choices, well, with something like that as a foundation, we can build interesting, creative lives that make the world better. Religion shouldn't be just a box into which to fit our lives. So part 3. We are a form of humanism, but a form of religious humanism. But still a humanism. At least my understanding of humanism is about human freedom. That we are the creators, or at least are part of the creators of this universe. For some humanists, humanism means we are totally rational and scientific. We are interested in human concerns and opposed to religion. Well, I'm going to do a quote here. My favorite explanation of humanism comes from Alan Bullock in his book, The Humanist Tradition in the West. He says, as a rough generalization, Western thought has treated humankind and the cosmos in 3 different modes. The first, the supernatural or transcendent, has focused on God, treating human beings as part of the divine creation. A second, the natural or scientific, has focused on nature and treats humankind as part of the natural order, like other organisms. The third, the humanistic, has focused on humankind and on human experience as the starting point for human beings' knowledge of themselves, of God, and of nature. What I take that to mean is that humanism is the acceptance of the human condition. That is where we start and where we finish. Everything we know and think starts and stays in the human relational experience we're having with each other. We are the ones who come up with all the disgusting and magnificent ideas, and we are also the ones who decide whether those ideas are disgusting or magnificent. It is in a human reality that we live, and how we live, each one of us, how we live changes that reality for better or worse. Even if you sit on your rear end just going along, you change the world. The humanist understanding of life takes me back to deed before creed. It is how we live and act that makes the world. And if you just live in the culture with the values that are there and don't live your own values coming out of inside of you, you aren't doing your job as a human being. For thousands of years, we human beings have been living with a top-heavy world, kept in our place by those on top, and their flunkies, the politicians. But if we don't express our own freedom, that is what we would continue getting. And as a sidebar, I offer you the present political happenings. While I have always disagreed with Republicans, I used to appreciate parts of their point of view and accepted that they had a legitimate different point of view. But in the last 30 years, there's been such a shift. And now with Paul Ryan bringing the philosophy of Anne Ryan, her objectivism, into the open, by the way, that is often called the philosophy of selfishness, the facade has dropped. I can now declare, at least personally, that the Republicans have become the enemies of the ethical humanist religious values. This is not politics. This is an affront to our basic understanding of life and to our values, especially to the value of the respect for the worth and dignity of every human being. You know, that this childish, inhuman, simplistic, mean-spirited, illogical philosophy isn't laughed off the stage is an indication of how superficial our culture has become. Another part. I don't know what number it is anymore. You often hear that American culture has gotten shallow. It's a consumer culture. All we care about is having the latest gadget and living the good life of eat, drink, and watch sports or reality television. Well, I go to Michael Harrington for a careful, insightful analysis of what's wrong with us. He was a social critic, philosopher, author of many books, most famously the influential book of the 60s, The Other American. He was also the founder of democratic socialism. And I might add, a atheistic product of the Jesuits. I probably mentioned him before. He makes the case that Western culture has parked God, the God idea, off to one side. And although you hear about God in the culture every time you turn your head, except for the very vocal true believers, people have moved on to a hedonistic absence of grander meaning. There is no grand meaning at the mall. Consuming has become the reason for existence. We don't need connections for something more noble. Individualism has run amok. That great historical corrective idea that came with the Age of Reason and with Jefferson, that the individual is central, important, all persons are created equal, that becomes, in the interpretations down through the years, not that we create a community in which individuals can find fulfillment, but that we create a culture in which the individual has the freedom just to worry about himself or herself. Harrington says that God was what gave human beings a sense of connection with the meaning and the purpose of the universe, of life. It gave human life a possible sublime quality. But God has been dying for a long time, and the vacuum left in his absence has been replaced with thoughtless, normless, selfish, hedonistic individualism that is actually, in his words, de facto atheism. Atheism in fact, but not in word. Atheism of meaning. God died, but without an heir, to give the individual and society some kind of noble reason for being. Harrington says serious atheists and agnostics share a common cause with serious believers, a concern for values as such, for a vision of individual and social meaning which goes beyond the latest consumer product. He says that de facto atheism is the enemy of both atheistic humanism and religious belief, because both are beliefs in the human capacity to aspire to great creative activity. And without such a cultural foundation that says life has potential meaning and purpose, silly consuming will take over. If we don't have the sense that life is about making something good, then just enjoying ourselves might be all that is left. I don't know if I agree with all of that, but it gives me the opportunity to think about ethical humanism as a replacement for de facto atheism. To start, as I think many of you know, I'm a curmudgeon. I hate everything. Part of it is that at my age, this doesn't quite feel like my world anymore. But I have a problem liking my fellow Americans, actually liking all of us, including myself. We are all so self-satisfied with our unexamined acceptance of this culturally created lifestyle. I drove to Maine in August to visit friends, and on the road there were all these nice new cars and SUVs and Winnebagos and trailers, and the automobiles had canoes and kayaks and bicycles on the roofs. Those are the nature lovers on the way to appreciate nature. And on the streets of Philadelphia, everyone seems to be plugged into some device, most of which cost hundreds of dollars. The wealth, the bounty is overwhelming, and we're supposed to be in some kind of recession, depression. I'm actually, honestly, not being accusatory. We ought to enjoy the good things in life. I know I do my part. But the problem is the idea that enjoying ourselves becomes the reason for living. Our most sacred values are turned into commercials, and it looks so good. And in the money culture, the good things or the ever-increasing pleasure things never stop increasing. The houses get better, the cars get better, new stuff that is supposed to be interesting arrives every day, but gets more and more simple-minded. There's always a new recipe with an unusual ingredient, and a new iPod each year, and so many video screens to look into, it gets to the point where you start to feel lonely if you don't have some kind of a screen to look into. We often hear we're obsessed with consuming, but I don't think we take delivery of that being the actual foundation of our culture. Knowing that simple idea has been translated into the reason for living. You know, even we progressives who mock McMansions and SUVs have to admit how our lifestyles have been affected by the superficiality of the culture. Over-the-top weddings, children's birthday parties, more entertainment than we can ever consume, and endless cooking shows offering unusual nuances of taste, new wines, new cheeses, new diets, new therapies, and vacations that at one time were about visiting interesting places have now become time to sit in your rear end on the beach or on a bar stool. And of course, I'm offering ethical humanism as a counterforce to that shiny superficiality that is calling us from every corner. Ethical humanism is a force centering our lives on bringing out the best, a force that can make our lives actions of higher meaning. I call this faith for a faithless time, in order to say that with or without the death of God, what matters are the beliefs in the human heart and soul and mind. What I continually call the human world is a product of the inner life of all human beings. And the faith I'm talking about is the value system that lives inside each person and that then they take into the world. The sense of self becomes the world we make. What people glibly call their spiritual lives is too often just self-indulgence. But if it is actually about the person wrestling with who they are and what they stand for, working on what they believe and how they should be treating others, then that is spiritual struggle. Ethical humanism has a belief system for people looking for a path to meaningful living in this superficial, consuming culture. But it doesn't work until you bring it inside. During the civil rights movement of the 50s and the 60s, there were Catholic priests and nuns in all those marches. And the Catholic Church supported civil rights. But I always wondered why that passion did not get down to the parish level. Why weren't the priests in the parishes telling those working class white ethnic communities that racism is a sin and the church was going to help those people get over it? And now that the world has gotten so small, with all the suffering, neglect, and violence so visible, I wonder who is going to draw the picture to make the obvious connections. My curmudgeonly displeasure with the self-satisfied enjoy life approach got me thinking about the failure of the Catholic Church on the local level in the 60s, and wondering who is speaking up about the self-satisfied gated community morality and mentality that we have built. The thing about belief in the humanist perspective, with this acceptance that we create this world, is that it leaves us vulnerable to a sense of shame for not doing more. Now that we cannot hide behind God as the creator of the world, how do we respond? I am honestly not necessarily saying that we should change our lives, but that the ethical humanist philosophy offers a view of life that should find its way into our inner lives. Because this is not about solving social problems, but about the life we are creating that includes social problems. Where are we going? Is this us? If not, then we have to ask, if all these social problems are actually products of our lives, who are we? And for that matter, who am I?